I'm Jon Sicotte, executive editor of the Brewer Magazine. Welcome to another edition of the Brewer Magazine podcast. We are sponsored by Keg Logistics, and you can check them out at keglogistics.com/brewermag for more details on that. Of course, you can follow, like, and subscribe to both of the podcast on YouTube and on Spotify. And of course, you can always go to brewermag.com 24 hours a day for your brewery resource needs. All right, well, I am just starting my vacation. You're listening to this, I'm already knee deep in who knows how many great local craft beers in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Had a great time in northern Wisconsin as well on our way up. But the important part is I wanted to be able to share this podcast with you, dig into the archives, go back about 4 years. The cover story was Branding Power, Tomme Arthur and Lost Abbey's diversity in product messaging. Got a great opportunity to talk to Tomme Arthur, just a wealth of knowledge. Great opportunity to be able to sit down and talk with him after running into him at Monk's Cafe in Philadelphia, of all places, and saying, you know, we should do a cover story sometime. And we finally got a chance to do that as we were going to have a chance to talk while the San Diego 2020 Craft Brewers Conference was going to go on. Yeah, that didn't happen. So we caught up about a year later and talked on Zoom. You get a chance to talk about distribution and market strategy that they have, the brand differentiation and consumer perception, and a lot of other things like production scheduling, SKU management, and all the different things that was going on at that time, which are still pretty relevant to today. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to dig into the archives and check out a little bit with Tomme Arthur here on the Brewer Magazine podcast. This Brewer Mag podcast is sponsored by Keg Logistics. Now's the perfect time to review your keg management strategy. Whether you're seeking a truly flexible keg rental program or intrigued by the seamless distribution freedom of paper fill, Keg Logistics is ready to craft a personalized solution for you, ensuring you receive the kegs you need precisely when you need them. For details, visit keglogistics.com/brewermag. Keg Logistics, modern solutions for keg efficiency.
So I started working at Peatsport in May of '97, and I was there for about 8 years or so, a little over eight or 9 years. And during that time, Peatsport went from being one location in Solana Beach to 2 locations, with this second one in Carlsbad that opened in '97. And then I think in 2005, might have been 2003, they opened the 3rd one in San Clemente. Actually, it was at least 2003, might have been 2001. But at that point, there was 3 brew pubs and no production models. So we started talking about whether it made sense to transition some of the recipes from Peatsport Solana Beach and Peatsport Carlsbad, off into more of the production model that started to pop up, and get away from just being a brew pub based thing. So that's kind of how we kind of started kicking the tires on it. And then Stone, kind of came out and said they were going to build their new facility in Escondido. And we were basically the first people that they kind of approached and said, you don't have a production model, but we've got this great brewery, does it interest you? And so then we started really putting the screws down to open Port Brewing and bring the Belgian beers across from Solana Beach under the Lost Abbey umbrella.
Oh, okay. So right now, at least when you started, how many beers were getting kind of transferred over and kind of were they rebranded or just names or moved over?
So we brought from Port Brewing, from Peatsport, Wipeout came across, Hop 15, Santa's Little Helper, Shark Attack, and a few other things. Very, very, very straightforward West Coast kind of, high hop, high octane kind of things. And then on the Abbey side, we transitioned a couple of recipes from Peatsport that were more farmhouse styled. So our Red Barn, our 10 Commandments, and then a couple of other beers, our Lost and Found came. Used to be called Double Overhead Abbey. So, about 5 or 6 things on the Abbey side came into play. But a lot of what the Lost Abbey became was just stuff I had been kind of waiting to do, and that's where that vision came into play.
Now, when it comes to that, are you leveraging kind of the background that you guys already had when you introduced yourselves? Because obviously people see a new name, they think new brewery, but you guys had all this experience coming in. So did that help you guys?
I think we had a lot of credibility for sure. I mean, certainly people had a ton of experience. They've been drinking Peatsport branded beers since 1992, 93. That pathway made it easy to see. And, we've been doing a lot of festivals and traveling and I think the brand was out there, but not necessarily the beer itself. People had to come here to get it, but they were very aware of what Peatsport branded beers were what they tasted like, looked like, the people, the experiences. And so it was our job to kind of take that and translate it into the bottle and then move it out to the shelf.
talk about a production model. Had you worked through production models before, and what was the learning curve like when it comes to that?
Yeah, the learning curve was super steep, that's for sure. My first brewing job was at a brew pub in '96, and so I spent '96 to basically the fall of 2005 being in a brew pub environment. And production brewing is a much different beast. Packaging has its own stuff. Everything we were doing originally was bottle conditioned, so that brought a whole nother level of complexity to the mix. We learned a lot, I would say, in the first 4 years about how to run before we even really learned how to walk. Not all of it was pretty, but we took some big swings, and a lot of the beers we were making, we were able to figure out relatively quickly. We had a great team, as we always have. People want to work for a brewery that's going to be progressive and take some shots.
Yeah. What was it at that point in time when you guys were talking about this production model that looked like it was the future, and craft beer was in that mode where it could actually grow like that and be able to find itself on a shelf?
I think that a lot of us just kind of understood that was a normal progression, and there wasn't a ton of breweries in town that had scaled anything. I mean, obviously Stone and Ballast Point, and to a lesser degree, AleSmith and Coronado were kind of out. Green Flash were in that production mode, but we saw that there was a burgeoning, really big opportunity in San Diego and Southern California to get out onto those shelves. And in order to do that, you had to have a real production environment. It was really tough. It wasn't really going to be easy on a pizza port level to just drop a small bottling line or canning line in, because there just wasn't any space for that. Those were set up to be brew pubs, and that made it very simple to see that we needed a dedicated facility to go do the projects that we kind of thought were important.
So when it comes to scale size, what was the brew pub, and then what did you purchase to move up and get how big?
So when I was originally brewing in Solana Beach, it was on an oversized 7, so it behaved a little bit more like a 10. The system in Carlsbad is a 15-barrel system, and then there's a 15-barrel system in San Clemente as well. The system that we bought from Stone is a true 30-barrel system. And what we got was not only a 30-barrel system, but we got 30 with scale. There was a couple of 30-barrel fermenters, a 90-barrel bright tank, and some bigger fermenters as well. So we had an ability with the tanks that were bolted to the floor to go small batch, single batch kind of things, 1,000 gallons at a time, up to 3,000 gallons. So we had room to go from single batch to triple batch stuff pretty simply.
Nice. When it came to the distribution side, what were you guys looking at? Was it the San Diego market? Was it all of Southern California? What was the starting point, and where have you gone from there?
So our original plan was just to get San Diego, LA turned on, and that was obviously very easy to see because Stone was going to be our distributor, and that's where they were pointing their compass. So our initial foray was straight away to San Diego, LA. And we pretty much knew that we needed to be, looking at Arizona, almost immediately, because there were a lot of people coming from Arizona that had previously experienced, the pizza port, model, and been in the pubs and been in the restaurants. And we've done a lot of work traveling to Arizona to do promotion. So there was this synergy between Arizona and San Diego for us. So those were the first two things. And then we've spent about 18 months, and then in year 2.5 or so, we went out and started looking at what I was imagining was going to be more of a hub and spoke model, where we would pick the big cities and then we would kind of branch out from there. So you look at your Philadelphias, your Bostons, your Chicagos, Seattles, your Denvers and Colorados. And so those were the markets that we ended up going towards, and just trying to figure out how to have a big metropolitan area that could support us on the fringes as well.
What kind of cost is that, though, when you're picking large cities far away and doing that? How much did that take up financially for you guys at the beginning? And are you still in that type of thought process?
No, we're certainly coming back from that these days. Everything has become a lot more velocity margin, case built. I mean, the Abbey brand was really built around higher dollar margin per case, lower turnovers, and that afforded us the ability to ship further with less beer on the trucks. But going east in less than truckload levels is really expensive, and it subtracts from the bottom line at a pretty appreciable number. In fact, we're finding it's getting to be almost impossible these days to get enough beer on the trucks to justify sending them that far.
Yeah.
It's something we've seen in the last 18 months for sure.
Sure. And is that, I mean, and pulling back isn't it almost seemed bad 10 years ago. Like it felt like you were doing something wrong, but now that is, I mean, staying in your market and finding those deeper holes, I think is really the new thing now.
Well, we had, the kinds of beers we were sending to those markets on the Abbey side specifically, there was room for them. There wasn't a lot of stuff like that, and we could find the shelf space we needed. But then, as other breweries grew up in those regions, and Chicago's a really interesting example. There's a huge old school Belgian roots in Philly and Chicago, but then around there, some breweries started doing those things that we were doing, and they could get them to the market cheaper and better, and and people wanted local interesting, and local interesting became very very cool, and we didn't need to ship it 3,000 miles anymore.
Right. And so then Port was doing more, like you said, the West Coast stuff. Lost Abbey was dealing with more Belgians and sours at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and still pretty much is, right? Was there that reasoning to have two breweries like that, two brands, to be able to have the consumer understand that, this is what you're looking for in this brand, this is what you're looking for in that brand?
I think we've always felt that it was going to be easier to tell the stories and keep them separate channel-wise. We wanted the Abbey to be a super premium brand. And if you look at a lot of wineries, they might have a top tier, middle tier, bottom tier sort of scenario. And the pricing's different, and the labeling's different, and it all just looks and feels different. So, I think from the get-go, we saw that there was room to have that be something. We produce a lot of different beers under one brand. It felt like we would run out of naming conventions and stuff that would make sense. So keeping the two apart, I think, has been from day one a very, very good decision on our part.
Do you find not confusion, but people that don't know that Port and Abbey are the same company and making the same brands, and good or bad from that? Do you think?
I think they tend to be interesting on a consumer level because a lot of Abbey people don't drink IPA, or IPA people don't drink Abbey beers. So there's clearly that. We just had an Instagram post a couple days back where somebody alluded to the fact that they had no idea that we even made the Hop Concept beers. And from the moment we launched that brand, we kind of looked at ourselves and said, well, people probably will be able to figure out, if they're in the know, that it's coming from San Marcos because it says so on the label. And that being said, there aren't a lot of production breweries in San Marcos. But what we did want to do was just, find ways to connect with the consumer. And the Abbey brand was really always about, that high value, high level, high dollar, celebratory function. And then the Port brand was supposed to be more of our everyday kind of drinking thing.
Yeah. And it's been, like you said, a Hop Concept was 17 that you guys launched that. Does that sound about right?
It's fair, yeah. We always forget when that was.
What did you learn from that? Having those two brands and then throwing a third one in, and like you said, creating like another consumership right there and finding a new base.
That one probably could have stayed in the Port brand umbrella. There was just, for me, there was a lot of, I feel pretty strongly around that time that it was getting very difficult to grab the consumer's attention. That's when, a lot of stuff started happening, and Untapped started becoming a thing, and ticking and chasing and doing things was a big deal. So we felt that people, if they were going to look at this brand, it would be new and it might be different and exciting to them. But our goal with the Hop Concept brand was to just kind of come out with something that was like taste and flavor, or taste and aroma, very straightforward. There were a lot of crazy beer names going on in the world at that time, and a lot of new IPA coming out every week, and you never knew who made it, what it was, what it tasted like. And we kind of wanted to strip it down and simplify it, and that's where the Hop Freshness series came from. Dank and Sticky tastes like a dank and sticky IPA. That's tropical and juicy. We're trying to give you the deliverables, and it's been a fun brand because it's stayed pretty clean. We don't add a lot of beers to that brand. It's got a very short portfolio of only about 6 or 8 things per year that we do within that sort of portfolio basis, and I think it works really well in that regard.
So bring me inside the production house, and how do you guys set up a schedule when you have all the different brands going, and how does a schedule break down in a week, and is it based on volume and things like that? How do you figure everything out in a year?
Yeah, the scheduling is, the SKU management is one of the most ridiculous things that we do around here. I mean, it's not only is there 4 brands, there's multiple packaging formats and things. It's a sheer insanity function. It's easy, I think, for a brewer because you're just following a recipe, right? And so as long as you know that, the first two brews on the platform today are, dank and sticky, and then might be followed by Mongo tomorrow, that's pretty easy. I think it's more about the material sourcing, the raw goods and finished goods and stuff like that. We just came out of we're working on reorganizing the cold box because we're kind of in a spring turnover with regards to seasonals and some stuff. And, the calendar is probably one of the harder parts to kind of work with because, you want to release things at certain times of the year. But we have to pay attention to what the Pizza Port calendar looks like. We have to pay attention to our calendar and then also what other brewers are doing. So I would think that for us, one of the biggest challenges in that world is not necessarily the scheduling, day to day, but more about the bigger picture scheduling month over month.
Yeah. And you said 4 brands, so obviously Tiny Bubbles as well, which you guys just launched into. Get me behind there. You guys, I know it came from another brewery and you guys were able to kind of purchase the recipe and the branding and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What worked there that you saw that would be good for you guys?
The first one was I've always loved the name Tiny Bubbles. I think it's super fun and celebratory, and it evokes a good time. I just felt very strongly that we didn't need to reinvent that wheel. We purchased the brand rights from Hollister Brewing Company. My friend Eric Rose and his family built that brewery, and then they sunsetted it a couple of years back and transitioned it over to another owner, and they weren't making it at the time. So we felt very strongly that we could explain why it made sense for us to take direction of it and bring it back to the forefront. It was only a brew pub beer, and it was one of the original Goes style beers that was brewed in California. One of the very, very first to ever win a GABF medal and things like that. So it had great pedigree, and it just needed to breathe, and that was something that seemed pretty easy for us to pull off.
Yeah. Oh, what's it like to purchase a brand like that? Was that something new to you guys and work with? I mean, is there a lot of copyright things and what just paperwork?
No, I think it was a lot easier than most transitions because they weren't currently brewing it. It was a very low impact. Not a lot of people outside of the region had heard of it. It didn't come with a ton of IP other than the name, and it wasn't like there wasn't a lot of brand equity behind it. It was just kind of a naming convention. But we saw the value in something that was trademarkable and moving forward had defendability and a lot of upside to it. So for me, it was not a difficult transaction in that regard. And we've sold some IP in the past as well. We've done some work to protect things and create contracts, and so. It's not difficult. It would have been a lot more difficult if it had been sort of a market beer with a lot of upside in terms of valuing it and things like that.
Yeah. When it comes to the different looks, branding, concept, you've kind of touched on this, how there are different consumer bases for each. For you guys, when you're thinking of promoting a beer and looking at it and where it's going to go, is your distribution, the whole portfolio can go anywhere? Or are you guys hitting and picking at different places?
Yeah,
how's that work? This Brewer Mag podcast is sponsored by Keg Logistics. Now's the perfect time to review your keg management strategy. Whether you're seeking a truly flexible keg rental program or intrigued by the seamless distribution freedom of paper fill, Keg Logistics is ready to craft a personalized solution for you, ensuring you receive the kegs you need precisely when you need them. For details, visit keglogistics.com/brewermag. Keg Logistics, modern solutions for keg efficiency.
We've always allowed the distribution footprint to be whatever it wants to be, but everything, for the most part right now, Tiny Bubbles has not made its way, sort of east. It's kind of only been a California, mostly Southern California function. But we've always looked at it as, the brand identity should just be super clean and should, represent the brand. And then if it travels, it can stand out on its own. We don't really worry about a regional basis or otherwise. Each brand does have its own feel. The Port Brewing brand right now has come out of a lot of the old school Pizza Port sense of the beach and that kind of that vibe and that feeling. And we're getting ready to do a full brand refresh for the Port Brewing beers because they haven't been refreshed in a while. The Abbey brand has always been sort of monastic heritage with a lot of imagistic art and storytelling and just that Catholic guilt kind of stuff going on. The Bible, the oldest stories, the oldest stories in the book, and going to that well as often as we can. And the Hop Concept brand was easy because that was built around simple, clean typography and simple, clean lines. And the Tiny Bubbles brand was fun because we got a chance to kind of go to a designer and say, here's what we have, and here's what we don't want. And we very strongly stated we didn't want Don Ho Hawaii kind of Hawaiiana function. And after that, it was cool to let them cut loose with something that had a good green field.
For the management, you like Gina and Vince and you, who else is in kind of the upper team of managers?
So Gina, Vince, myself, and another gentleman named Carl are the 4 principal owners in the business. And Vince and Gina manage the Pizza Port side, more exclusively, and Carl and I kind of handle a lot of the day-to-day stuff over here. But we have a team of about 5 directors that do a lot of the stuff, which of course Adam's one of those people. We have a head brewer and a director of brewery operations. And so, we have built over 15 years here a big footprint and a big team of people that can handle it. Someday the goal is obviously that all of us get to retire,
right? Right. So is it, like a weekly, a monthly get together, being able, especially in this, I don't know how you guys are working together. How is everything put together in like a month when it on a monthly basis?
We try as owners to meet every Monday. That's kind of our big thing, and we meet in person. This business wasn't built by Zooming and not sharing beers, so we make it a point to do so. And it's been good through the pandemic. It's been obviously a little more difficult, but person-to-person contact is how ownership typically works, and on a small business level. So it's important, I think, to keep that part of it up. And then at a managerial director level, we have a couple of meetings per week here, but we're not a heavy meetings team. We're working on that. It's probably one of our downsides that we don't have enough meetings, but at the same time, meetings don't always solve things.
That's true. Is there anything that has happened since the launch of Port and Abbey and the new that you guys learned from, didn't like it, aren't going to do it again, or something that you really do like and you're glad that you did it?
We spent a lot of time trying to become a debt-free brewery, which is sort of a badge of honor and a pride thing, but it gets expensive to be able to put all your money back into assets and stuff. So I think for us, the lesson was, what's the right amount of borrowing? I think when we built the brewery, we thought that the relationship to the market we would just naturally continue to grow, and we've actually not grown the last few years. And so we may have over-purchased, and that would be kind of my thing would be to, telling new brewers to, maximize your efficiencies and really, squeeze before it's, new tanks are sexy, but they also are expensive. So I've learned a lot in that regard in terms of, what it means to try to manage your cash and your basis, and running a business is difficult.
Yeah. When it came to what you guys had planned back in 2006, how true to your business plan did you get to stay? And I mean, I obviously I hear tons of changes always happen. What were some of those that maybe you weren't expecting, or things that you wanted to do and you decided not to?
I would say that the biggest one that's kind of easy for me to see is that, we set out to be a world-class brewery, and that was very strongly ingrained in that we wanted to be part of the, culture of innovation and forward thinking. And I don't believe that we've gotten away from that. We grew up at a time when a lot of other breweries around us and regionally or otherwise went right on past us in terms of size and scope and scale, and that changed the footprint and the dynamics and stuff. We're a much smaller brewery today than I think a lot of people ever think we are. We made about 10,000 barrels of beer last year. At our zenith a few years back, we made about 15,000. So we've always been a much smaller brewery than people kind of, I think, imagine, which is great because that tells you that we've done a great job of getting into their mind and really becoming part of their understanding of craft. We remained small. We didn't take on a bunch of new partners, and that didn't change the business model. So, we get to be us without having a lot of those external pressures. But 15 years into it, we're still making some of the same great beers that we started with, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Let's, talk a little bit about that. You mentioned the 3 tiers of wine and how you guys want to, see yourselves as a high quality,
low volume type of place, which that's what wine does a lot with too. Have you kind of taken that? I mean, you guys are, near the wine regions and stuff like that. Do you see that mentality flow into your business models as well?
Well, we have a beer club, and we were one of the very first people to, back in 2006, to even really engender that conversation. So our Sinners and Saints beer club is kind of really foundationally important right now, on the Abbey brand side. It gives us a chance to connect to the Uber consumer. It gives us a chance to put very small batch things in play. We're talking, 200 cases and less. And it's a great, showcase for us to, be small, be really, intriguing, and not be market driven. And that, I think, has always been kind of the hallmark of that brand. That brand wants to be, exquisite. It wants to be exceptional. And sometimes you don't have to play in the same 6-pack arena, and you can do those things.
Yeah. You were talking about having the 4 different lines, and especially the sour lines and sour canning, or even just canning and re-fermentation, if you're working with fruit and things like that. That seems to be a big problem right now. I think there's probably a lot of newer breweries that just don't know the ins and outs of what they're working with yet. They're just pushing stuff out to the market as fast as they can. And have you guys had those problems? Did you learn through those, or have you been able to kind of been slow enough to learn your process that way?
I think we were pretty solid in our foundation, given how much time and we'd had on the Abbey side, and a lot of the sort of the data and stuff that we learned there. The process for us is a little less about trying to give the canned fruit beer the bombastic fruit thing, and that's what's causing the problems, is that they're just leaving way too much fermentability in a can, and we're not chasing that at all. The kinds of things we're putting into the can, we're hoping are super stable, and there's process from here that we are comfortable with in terms of that. So I don't think we'll see that. We did have one batch of the Tiny Bubbles originally that got a little bit more carbonated than we had liked, and we made it a process tweak in that to put the fruit in a different way.
Yeah. What kind of lab do you guys have and quality team that you work with?
So we have a fairly substantial lab for a brewery our size, at least in terms of equipment and capabilities. Obviously we can plate anything. We've got a full Anton Par, machine that allows us to measure, CO2 and DO in bottles and package. We have the ability to count yeast on a digital level on a salometer, and keep looking at more ways to do so. But I think our comfort is part practicality. Like, this is what we know Brettanomyces in our world does, and this is how we deal with it. And then we come back over the top and we can test and plate and look at things analytically, under microscopes and do stuff like that, and gives us that predictability. Our lab is pretty robust for a small scale as we have.
Yeah. San Diego's so competitive. I mean, you really can get beat up there. You learn a lot. How is that market, and how does that help you guys learn to be able to distribute anywhere else and market anywhere else?
Yeah, it's it's kind of one of those, you're always in it. I feel it's kind of frog in the pot, because it's always been that way. Mm-hmm. At least since we started this 15 years ago, it's been a pretty competitive market. Clearly it wasn't 25 years ago, but the last 15 years, and certainly the last 7, have gotten to become terribly competitive. But it forces you to make great decisions. It forces you to be on your game, and some days you go 4 for 4, and other days you don't. So it feels good when you hit the home run, but they're not all home runs these days.
You touched on it, just talking, obviously at some point all of you guys are going to be moving on. How are you building your team right now to be able to continue everything that is going on right now? I mean, are you comfortable and confident in the team you have now if you guys had to step away?
Yeah, I think that most people assume that I do everything in terms of flavor and stuff, and I'm not on the brew deck, and I'm not in charge of packaging and those things. I've really tried to step a little bit out of the blending process and give my guys some really great runway so that they can create and make decisions and have that. That's been fun for me, because when it comes down to it, I get to say, hey, here's what we need to do, go find it, figure it out, and then let me certify it at the end and make sure that we all agree. But this is ultimately their their work and build up, and they get to take a lot of credit for that, and that's good. I do think that the company could run without me on a lot of things. And I bring a big 25 years of perspective to the table every time I walk through the door, but those aren't always needed on a day-to-day basis. So,
how has it felt to kind of transition away from the beer aspect as much to everything else that you have to do? I mean, is that something that you had thought of 20 years ago?
No, and it was interesting because when I got into brewing was very simply, you got out of bed, you did what needed to be done, you beat yourself up, you did stuff, you tangibly could figure out what you did, and then you went home. So, for the 9 years that I was in the brew pub environment, I'd be like, cool, I got up today, I cleaned 2 tanks, I filtered a beer, I prepped for tomorrow's brew, and then, I knew I did a lot of work. It's really hard to measure how much work you do when your work is tied to so many different things. And so there's a lot of days when I go home and I feel like I've got nothing done, even though I've been part of a lot of different things. So that transition was unique to me because I really enjoyed the tangible, I got this done sense of a day.
This Brewer Mag podcast is sponsored by Keg Logistics. Now's the perfect time to review your keg management strategy. Whether you're seeking a truly flexible keg rental program or intrigued by the seamless distribution freedom of paper fill, Keg Logistics is ready to craft a personalized solution for you, ensuring you receive the kegs you need precisely when you need them. For details, visit keglogistics.com/brewermag. Keg Logistics, modern solutions for keg efficiency.